Alrighty then, we are in beautiful Lakewood, Ohio. We're continuing on our lighthouse project, but I didn't take any videos as we came past Cleveland because we're on the freeway and I don't have a GoPro. I have a cell phone and I'd hate to drop it in the middle of I-90. So we just skipped that part. Stop here, take a little break, do a little walking around. There's some interesting things to see down here by the lake. And then we're going to see the Lorraine Lighthouse and the Vermilion Lighthouse today. Have ourselves a little afternoon dinner and head on home. So I hope you enjoy the video. So let's go. So this is the view from Lakewood Park from a place called the Solstice Steps. They built these terrace steps right on the bluff overlooking the lake. And people come here to meditate, sunbathe, just generally enjoy the day. And it looks like we have a few sailboats. An example of the break wall and all the stuff they pile up to prevent erosion of the lakeshore from the lake. And we'll see if we can see it. That structure out there. There it is. There's the water intake for the city of Cleveland. Now look what we have. One of the famous Lake Erie water snakes. They're a protected species. I guess he's alive. Let's stick your tongue out and say hi. Laying on a rock. And the view from the scenic overlook from Lakewood Park. Looking east towards the city of Cleveland. And we have, sounds like, a jet plane coming in for landing at Burke Lakefront Airport.
Do not go over there.
So this is Lorraine Harbor, and we take the walk down to the lookout point where we can see the Lorraine Harbor Lighthouse. The lighthouse is only accessible by boat, and when we go to edit the video, we'll do some more voiceover to give you the history of the lighthouse and other good information that I don't have memorized out here. And we can catch a glimpse of it right over there. But we'll get a closer look in a few minutes. And we have offensive locks. Some of them been there quite a while. I'm sure they mean something. Must mean something romantic. After all, it is a romantic place by the lake. And it stretches as far as the eye can see. Alrighty then, as promised, let's talk about the Lorraine Lighthouse in Lorraine, Ohio. Now this is the Black River that runs through Lorraine and flows to Lake Erie. And Lorraine, Ohio saw its first form of a light, navigation light, that was simply a lantern hung on the end of a pole at the end of the Black River during the early 1800s. And in 1836, there was a cylindrical brick tower capped with a lantern room built at the end of the pier, and that had 8 lamps fueled by lard oil with 15-inch reflectors that was used to produce a fixed light. And that was the first formal type of navigation aid that you could say existed in Lorraine, Ohio, besides simply a lantern hung on the end of a pole. Now in 1855, the Lighthouse Board requested funds for rebuilding the pier head light, as the beacon was 30 miles west of Cleveland and 50 miles east of Marblehead, so it served as both a harbor and a lake coast light and was located in a prime location. Plans called for a 3-story cast iron frame tower to be placed in the pier head, but instead, government project of course, the tower was rebuilt of brick and equipped with a 4th order Fresnel lens in 1857. An elevated walkway to permit the keeper to reach the tower in bad weather was completed in 1869. Remember about Fresnel lenses, the smaller the order number, the larger the lens. There was not a formal lighthouse keeper residence in Lorraine until 1905, and that's when the government spent $5,000 to build a keeper's dwelling. There was no dwelling at the time. A keeper would receive $600 a year for tending the 2 range lights at the station. From this amount, he would pay $144 a year for rent of the house, leaving only $456 a year to support himself and his family. Over the course of the next several decades, the weather played havoc with the lights in Lorraine, and they were damaged or blown off their foundation or run into by ships. So Congress finally provided $35,000 in October 22, 1913 for a proper light and fog signal on the west breakwater, and that's what you see in Lorraine today. They started construction in 1960. By the close of that year, the concrete base was in place and the steelwork was erected, and the reinforced concrete walls were finished, allowing a temporary light to be shown from top of the new structure. A revolving 4th order Fresnel lens, which produced 5 seconds of light followed by a 5-second eclipse, commenced operation in the new lighthouse on April 7, 1919, and a diaphone foghorn signal, sounding a group of 3 blasts every 30 seconds, was commissioned in May 13, 1919. And just in case you're wondering, A diaphone is a type of noise-making horn used for foghorns mostly because of its deep tones. It was actually invented by Robert Hope Jones, who was also the creator of the Wurlitzer organ. And if you don't remember what a foghorn sounds like, it goes something like this. Okay, so where were we? In 1922, the old wooden tower, the lighthouse, was replaced by a skeletal steel tower, and it was converted from oil to electric light and operated on commercial power. The residence for the keepers and their families was finally provided in 1922 when they built a double dwelling in Lorraine and transferred from the United States Shipping Board to the lighthouse service. The Coast Guard assumed control of the Lorraine Lighthouse in 1939, and they had 3 men stationed here from the local unit at the light. And finally, to make a long story short, in 1973, the Coast Guard turned the lighthouse over to the General Services Administration, which proceeded to try to sell the lighthouse. And they actually advertised the sale all over the world. The city of Lorraine people got together with the Historical Society to form the Save the Lighthouse Committee. And finally, in 1977, after the lighthouse sat abandoned for many years, they were able to purchase the lighthouse for $1. They proceeded to refurbish the lighthouse. The Glidden Paint Company donated 160 gallons of paint to paint the lighthouse and actually used the before and after pictures of the lighthouse in some of their advertisements. At this particular time, the Lighthouse Committee and the Society runs tours in the lighthouse in the summertime, but the lighthouse light is not lit and not used for navigation any longer. The original 4th order Fresnel lens is now on display at the Lorraine Port Authority. They spent $20,000 cleaning and restoring the lens, and it was actually built by one of the few American companies that built lenses, the Macbeth Evans Glass Company of Pittsburgh. And that, boys and girls, is the story of the Lorraine Lighthouse. And so now we left Lorraine and we headed westbound on Route 6, scenic ride along the lakeshore, to come to the city of Vermilion, Ohio. Now, Vermilion is known as the city of sea captains because many captains from the seas and from the Great Lakes shipping built their retirement homes here. And it also is the home of the world-famous Woolly Bear Festival. I'm sure you've heard of it. Now, the Woolly Bear is the caterpillar stage of the Isabella gypsy moth, and it has the uncanny ability to predict the weather. And so a local weatherman named Dick Goddard, who was famous on Channel 8 TV in Cleveland, who loved the weather and who loved animals, started this Woolly Bear Festival long time ago, and it's been going for over 50 years. And it happens sometime in the fall. Now, the history of the Vermilion Lighthouse pretty much began the way all of the lighthouses on the southern shore of Lake Erie did. First started out as nothing more than a lantern on a pole. Then there was a wooden lighthouse that was built in the mid-1800s that really wasn't able to stand up to the weather conditions off of Lake Erie. So in 1877, it was proposed that a more permanent lighthouse be built, and that was going to be a cast iron lighthouse as the main frame, clad in wood and or steel. And as it turned out, that the iron for the lighthouse was leftover cannons from the Civil War, specifically the cannons that were used to manufacture the Vermilion Lighthouse were from leftover surplus cannons that were no longer needed, and they came from Fort Sumter. They were melted down in a company in Buffalo, New York, and the Pieces of the lighthouse were formed there, and then they were brought to Vermilion by freighter and put together. Now, when we came into town, we knew that the lighthouse that you see here wasn't the original. It was a reconstruction scale model of the original, as the original had been torn down and thought to have been recycled, but more on that in a minute. What we expected to see was an Inland Seas Maritime Museum on the grounds of Commodore Wakefield and his family's property here in what was called Harbor View. And instead, what we saw was the old mansion is gone. The Maritime Seas Museum is gone. There is a pretty little park in its place, and in place of the mansion is a parking lot. Now, all the things from inside the museum had been moved to the Maritime Museum in Port Clinton, so they weren't lost. But somewhere along the line in history, the family had, lost the property and the city had taken over. But the Wakefield family was instrumental in recreating the lighthouse here on the grounds of Harbor View, and it's now a permanent part of the city's park. And in case you were wondering, that is the actual bridge off the freighter Canopus that was part of the museum until the museum and everything was torn down. And the bridge was purchased at auction for $4,000, moved to Akron, and it's now a lawn ornament in front of one of the businesses in Akron. And so it was early spring in 1929 when Ted Wakefield and his brother Ernest were down at the lighthouse and noticed that the foundation was damaged and that was leaning toward the side. Particularly heavy winter on the lake with a lot of ice, and the ice had damaged and shoved the lighthouse off its foundation. They went and told their father, Commodore Wakefield, who owned the property here at Harbor View, and they tried, but in vain, to purchase the lighthouse for themselves and try to save it. It was later that Ted undertook the project of recreating the lighthouse that you see now, the replica, and the old lighthouse was dismantled and transported back to Buffalo for destruction, or so everybody thought. Now, the original lighthouse had a 5th order Fresnel lens that was removed from the original lighthouse and spent time here at the museum here at Harbor View, and that has now been moved to the Maritime Museum in Port Clinton. For many years, the replica lighthouse just had a fixed red light, and in 1914, local leaders in the community raised the funds to have this Fresnel lens, which is also a replica 5th order Fresnel lens, remanufactured by Artworks in Florida, which seems to be a company that specializes in this kind of work. Now, the original 1877 lighthouse, like we said, was decommissioned and took apart in 1929, and it was transported to Buffalo to be turned into scrap. However, the state of New York heard about it. They had a need for a lighthouse, so it was rescued from the scrap heap, renovated, and 6 years later, it was placed on a cement crib off Cape Vincent at the entrance to the St. Lawrence River. Now, that particular navigation hazard is known as East Charity Shoal, and that was the new name assigned to the lighthouse. It was fitted with a 4th order Fresnel lens, and it was a gas lamp lit by a Sedlin and fully automated, no keeper. In 1992, the lighthouse was converted to electric white flashing light and was powered by a solar panel and battery, and the lens is on display at the Coast Guard station in Buffalo, New York. And in 2009, the lighthouse was put up for auction. The Coast Guard didn't want to own lighthouses anymore, they just wanted to maintain them. And a purchaser in Texas bought the lighthouse for $25,000. So it's now a private lighthouse, although the Coast Guard does maintain easements so they can have access and maintain the maintenance on the light.
In 1929, the 35-foot lighthouse off the waters of Lake Erie, near the shore of Vermilion, Ohio, disappeared. Records show that it had been sent to Buffalo, perhaps to be sold for scrap. A skeleton tower replaced it. Vermilion residents searched without success to locate the old Vermilion Lighthouse. In September 1994, Olin M. Stevens of Columbus, Ohio, discovered an old newspaper article that told of his grandfather's first Lake Ontario assignment as keeper of Tibbetts Point Light in 1937.
Although this is my first duty on Lake Ontario, Charity Shoal Light, visible from Tibbetts Point, is an old friend. The tower upholding the gas lamp on Charity formerly was under my charge at Vermilion, near Lorraine. Victim of an ice shove, it was salvaged and taken to Buffalo, where it was assigned to Charity.
The missing lighthouse had been found. It now marks East Charity Shoal, a shipping hazard about 3,000 feet long and at some points covered by just 10 feet of water. The light still operates as a reference point for ships navigating the St. Lawrence Seaway Channel and is located 7 miles off Cape Vincent.
And with that, boys and girls, that's the story of the Lorraine and the Vermilion lighthouses. We have to break up this video series into parts just due to the limitations of trying to get something uploaded to YouTube, and we need to keep the files small. We'll continue with part 2 next. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.